Hi everyone. For this screencast, I found an article called Having Their Toxins and Eating Them Too. It talks about a few different chemical defense mechanisms. I thought it was pretty interesting. Hopefully you'll think it's interesting too. It focuses mostly on something called chemical sequestering. Basically, the organism does not synthesize the chemical. It obtains a chemical from some source, and it's usually its food source. The chemical is usually used for defense. I figured the easiest way to talk about this would be to just give several different examples. The first example is fairly obvious. Human medicine. We use morphine for pain. Quinine was the first treatment for malaria. Caffeine we use for energy. And all of these come from plants. They can also be toxic at high levels. Obviously, these are just a few examples. A second example for chemical defense is the rattlebox plant. These plant species contain pyrrolizidine alkaloids, which cause respiratory failure and liver malfunction. They are a problem with livestock because they are toxic enough to kill cattle. But there's a species of moth, commonly known as the rattlebox moth, whose larvae feed on this plant without any ill effects. This is because the alkaloids aren't actually changed into the toxic form in the moth, unlike in all other animal species. The caterpillars of the moth feed on the plant and gain the chemical, and the toxin protects them from predators like spiders. The male moths then retain the chemical, but the females don't. So the males pass the chemical to the female during copulation, and then the females then pass the chemical to their eggs. The eggs remain protected until they hatch, and then the caterpillars again start to feed on the rattlebox plant, and it's an endless cycle. My next example is probably my favorite. Philobates terribilis, more commonly known as the golden dart frog, is the most deadly poison dart frog. Found in its skin is a chemical called batrachotoxin. This toxin opens sodium ion channels and causes an irreversible paralysis. The toxin is 15 times stronger than curare and 10 times stronger than tetrodotoxin, which is the pufferfish toxin. So the golden dart frog definitely earned the name terribilis. The frogs aren't affected by the toxin because they have a different form of sodium ion channels that doesn't allow the toxin to bind. Recently, the golden dart frog has been very important to neurological and muscular disorder research, as well as research in new painkillers. The next example is another poison dart frog called the Ecuadorian frog. Its scientific name is Epipetabates tricolor. The toxin found in its skin is called epibetadine. It is 200 times more powerful than morphine and is non-addictive. Unfortunately, it is also highly toxic. Despite its toxicity, it is still being researched for a morphine replacement. Researchers are trying to synthesize compounds with similar structures in order to gain the analgesic effects without the high toxicity. Epibetadine has also been used in research of neurological disorders like Alzheimer's. Just like the rattlebox moth that I talked about earlier, the golden dart frog and the Ecuadorian frog did not synthesize their toxin. They obtain the toxin from the food they eat, most likely beetles or ants, although the exact source of the toxin has not been identified as far as I know. The very last example has to do with a poisonous bird. Apparently this bird was found with the same toxin as the golden dart frog. However, the article that I have only mentions it, so I'd like to show you a video that gives some more information.
When I was a graduate student in the field, taking birds out of the nets, these pitahuis are jay-sized birds with very strong, sharp beaks and big claws, and they can easily scratch your hands. And when I was taking them out of the nets as a graduate student, they scratched my hands and really hurt. So the first thing I did was I popped my finger in my mouth and licked my cut, ran off to the next net, and then my mouth began to tingle and burn. And until it happened a second time to one of our other researchers, we didn't realize what happened, but then we put our stories together and we started to suspect that actually the toxins came from the birds and not something else that we'd been touching. And when we went to ask the local folks about it, they said, oh yeah, those birds are poisonous and you shouldn't be touching those. And so back when I was a graduate student, we started working on these birds, and we teamed up with folks at the National Institutes of Health. And after a couple years of research, we were able to isolate and identify the compound that's responsible for the toxicity. And this is it here. It's called batrachotoxin. It's in a family of compounds known as batrachotoxins. And they're steroidal alkaloid neurotoxins. And they're steroidal because they have this steroid-like base. They're alkaloidal because they have this basic nitrogen that's contained in a ring structure that gives it the properties of an alkaloid. And it's a neurotoxin because it binds to voltage-gated sodium channels in such a way that when the channel is activated and open, it holds it in the open conformation. And what this does is it prevents the cell from being able to pump the sodium to one side of the cell and reestablish the ionic potential that's needed for that cell firing. And so basically this incapacitates nerve and muscle membranes, and it's exactly what caused the numbing and tingling sensation that we felt. But in higher doses, it can actually cause paralysis and death, and this has been known. Gram for gram, the batrachotoxins are among the most toxic natural substances known, more toxic than curare or strychnine. And in everything that's been studied, basically, to date, with the exception of one species that I'll talk about, they all seem to be sensitive to the toxins, and they seem to be poisoned by the toxins. So basically everything with a central nerve system that uses voltage-gated sodium channels is poisoned by these compounds. Now, batrachotoxin means frog poison, and so these toxins were previously known and identified, especially in the Phyllobates poison dart frogs from Central and South America. This is Phyllobates terribilis, the most toxic of all. And of the 170 to 200 species of poison dart frogs that have been described in the world, only 3 species have actually been used for poisoning dart tips. And those are the Phyllobates frogs, and they contain exactly the same poisons as our pitahui birds in the beginning. Not similar, but exactly the same. And in fact, in the year 2000, along with our colleagues from National Institutes of Health, we described several new toxins that we found only from the birds. And when they went back to the old frog poisons, they were able to find some of those same poisons in the frogs as well. So it appears as though they're using exactly the same poisons as these Phyllobates frogs.
So at the end of the video, the speaker talked about how the bird and the golden dart frog had the exact same toxins, which is pretty interesting because the pitahui bird is from New Guinea and the poison dart frog is from Colombia. They are not even on the same continent. So completely different areas, and apparently this insect that gives the toxin is in both areas, so it must be more widespread than was originally thought when it was first discovered. These are my references. I hope you enjoyed my screencast.